Lake Pepin is at the very center of the culture of this community. All the towns and all the people around the lake is dependent on the lake, whether you're a marina owner, fishing guides, merchants, homeowners, sportsmen, and of course conservationists. I don't know that anybody could even try to get their heads around what would happen to this area if Lake Pepin should prematurely disappear.
The diversity is very well documented, particularly bird life. This is a flyway, and you can hear the eagles in the background actually, and incredible number of fish species as well.
About 1 million tons of sediment is settling in the mouth of Lake Pepin annually. From 1830 to present, the rate of sediment has increased tenfold. At that rate, the mouth of Lake Pepin fills up by the end of this century. The entire lake fills in 340 years.
The biggest changes that I've seen in the last 40 years, without a doubt, has been the sedimentation at the head of the lake. If you look right across as I'm pointing, there's a green buoy over there. On the other side of the buoy was the lower end of the lighthouse island 40 years ago. So the sedimentation rate has built that island probably almost 3/4 of a mile.
We're losing the head of the lake as a cleaning agent, as a settling pond, and that will affect the Mississippi, which will affect everything all the way down to Louisiana.
We have a huge number of people that use Lake Pepin for sailing. And the upper end of the lake virtually is not usable anymore because it's so shallow from the sedimentation.
We definitely see a decrease in depth, a lack of light penetration, which also limits aquatic vegetation in the upper part of Lake Pepin.
Aquatic vegetation is very important as a food resource for migratory waterfowl. It's a very important food resources for muskrats. From the standpoint of fish, people associate and catch fish in vegetation. But to fish, they're actually feeding off the invertebrates that are living on the vegetation. The vegetation's shelter for them, it's structure.
You don't have near the vegetation, the aquatic vegetation that you used to have 30, 40 years ago.
The good news is the work that needs to be done can be done. There's a long history of successful restoration projects along the Mississippi. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has recently come out with a plan for Lake Pepin, putting Lake Pepin on a sediment diet, so to speak. The sediment diet is essentially a two-part plan, calling for a 50% reduction of the new sediment coming from upstream and a 50% reduction of the sediment already existing in Lake Pepin, constantly getting resuspended through the wind and wave action.
There is an opportunity to improve habitat in Upper Lake Pepin by utilizing the sediment that's coming in to build and construct islands. I think we can really improve aquatic habitat through strategic dredging and island placement. We can protect marshes. We can really improve water clarity.
We have been building islands on the Mississippi River since the 1980s. We've learned a lot from all of those islands, and we have been successful with every one of these islands. We would be building islands to reach the objective that we're looking for at Pepin. We're trying to break down the current. We're trying to break down the wind fetch, because that wind will stir up the bottom of the water. And when it stirs up the bottom, that water can then stir up the sediment, which then clouds the water, makes it dirty, makes it kind of tough for the plants to grow in those areas. That's one of the purposes that the islands serve, is they break up that wind, and the water is clearer, allowing light to penetrate farther into the water for plants to grow. From a standpoint of fisheries, what islands provide is they create these areas that are quiet, that don't have current. These fish, like the bluegills and largemouth bass, need places to spend the winter. Those places are usually at least 3 feet deep, and they don't have any current. So islands then, built properly, can block areas from current, and then if you dredge out behind them, they can create these quiet, deep areas that fish will migrate to, sometimes several miles, to spend the winter.
We have to acknowledge the fact that there is a problem, and I think this has been pretty well documented. And now there's a time for action.
The history of habitat restoration on the Mississippi has been all about local, public, grassroots support.
The public will play a role in determining whether restoration will continue on the river, whether it's the head of Pepin or any place along the Mississippi River. The public will have to transmit and say that that's their desire, this is what they want. because that's what Congress will fund.
I would very much like to do whatever I can to see some progress toward restoration of the head of Lake Pepin in my lifetime.
This is an important issue for all of us in Minnesota and Wisconsin that live and work around Lake Pepin. It's our lake, and we want everybody to be educated and involved.
I know how much I've enjoyed the lake in the 40 years that I've lived here. And I would certainly like to have the opportunity for my children or grandchildren or future generations to have the same experience.